Started up and it's official now. Recording is in progress. I think Brian Woodley said he'd be here too. I'm not sure if he's actually going to be in person or if he's going to be online. So what you see in front of you here is some drawing that Luke and I did with some colors on a map. And so what you'll see with that, and I'll walk through it here, that is an update to what our current future land use map is. And our current future land use map is this right here. Oh, nice. Thanks, Luke. And so just as a general brief overview, what we were able to do is to collapse some of these land use designations so that there aren't as many, and really just simplify the map, hopefully, and reduce the number of colors on there, and then get rid of ones that either clutter up the map or only apply to one small little area. So for instance, like we have a designation there for recreational riverfront. Well, there's only one small area that's actually designated. Yep, right in there. So that's what we did with these drawings and colors on this map. And so one thing I will hand out here is our descriptions of the future land use categories that are updated. And we discussed these over the past 2 meetings. So you should be relatively familiar with them. Yep. And so on the first page are our downtown and neighborhood mixed use designations. And what those are shown in the purple here, as well as the pink. And then the neighborhood mixed use. Yep, that's downtown core and downtown fringe. And then at the bottom, we have the neighborhood mixed use. And that's where you see the pink. A lot of times it's drawn over red on this map. So think about the Mankato corridor, then along 5th Street, where we have some of the existing, like the Quick Trip, for instance, over there, and the barbershop, Rogers Meats, that area has that mixed use neighborhood designation. And so if we're looking at those are kind of the first 3 that we took a look at. And then I'll get into some other ones as well. But in terms of those first 3, what we looked at doing in this area here is expanding the mixed use downtown core, or the downtown core area, into these pink locations. Essentially, that's area that's already zoned mixed use downtown core. So in that case, we're just extending the designation to match the existing zoning. So that's where there's a number of different maps that come into play. That is, right now it's designated as fringe, but the zoning is actually mixed use downtown core. Yep. So
the area we're talking about from downtown. Okay. Whether the brown area on 4th Street, I think we call it remember when.
Yeah. So what Luke is referencing right now is an area, we call it the Claw, because it's a residentially zoned area, kind of right in here. And if you see it on the screen, it's right in here. And so right now that area is zoned, or is designated downtown fringe. And so what we did in that area is we kept this as fringe, which has some homeowners on it and kind of a mix of rental and homeowners. And we looked at redesignating these areas in here, especially with the Masterpiece Theater, or I'm sorry, Masterpiece Hall project, redesignating that to downtown core. And so what that would do is that would facilitate reuse and redevelopment in 1, 2, 3 blocks, which we do anticipate related to that project.
Well, but half of those blocks on the south side are Washington Cross anyway, so.
Exactly.
Really only looking at a couple of blocks.
Yep. So that's getting pretty specific, but that is related to a project that we know is on the horizon here. Tanya. Yep. So we're just going over a couple different maps here. This is some additions to the future land use map that we're looking at changing. And so what we were doing is just going through, and Brian, the first 3 categories. There's not a lot of changes in the first 2 categories, the downtown, the mixed use downtown and the downtown fringe. But you will see if we move into the mixed use neighborhood, we added a lot in there. So the mixed use neighborhood, where was our, yes, the pink, there we go. So what we did with that is we looked at the commercial corridors. Really, it's the traditional commercial areas outside of the core area of downtown. So you have Mankato Avenue, you have 5th Street, as I mentioned previously, but then you also have here in the West 5th Street area. This is where you have the west branch of the Winona National Bank. You have the Dairy Queen that's over there in this area, Callista Court, those types of uses. So what that would do is that would promote mixed use on the west side of town in response to some concerns about, hey, we're seeing a lot more commercial activity on the east side. How about trying to facilitate some of that on the west side as well? And you'll see with this in here, what we did is the areas that are being used as residential right now, so some of the supportive housing, that is Callista Court, St. Anne's, we designated that as multifamily residential to match the existing use that's there. Exactly. Yep.
How are you zoning owner property?
That would be the mixed use neighborhood.
Commercial mixed use, isn't
Oh,
it?
commercial mixed use. Yep. I'm sorry.
So to touch a little bit more on the existing or the proposed mixed use neighborhood designation that Carlos is walking through. When we did the rezoning to Central School, which is over here, and we changed it to mixed use neighborhood, we did a quick analysis that we noticed that there are neighborhood commercial nodes about 0.3 miles throughout the city of Winona. And what we're trying to do is identify where exactly those are and making sure that those are re-legalized through this process and that it matches the existing zoning elements where we see our B1 neighborhood districts as well as our existing mixed use neighborhoods. So you'll see mixed use neighborhood here, mixed use neighborhood here, and then these B1 that are in the dark red, which is coming up slowly, that are kind of spread throughout the city in these smaller locations as well.
So
then how would that work long term? If I buy a piece of property across one of these areas and kind of get something else to happen, different zoning or something, you go to the lesser as we do now. So if it's R2, you look at R1 stuff, or if it's R3, you look at R2. That's something.
That's a really good question. I think that the intention, based on what we've been hearing from all of you, is that the goal would be to have the least restrictive use be the next step forward rather than the more restrictive use. So currently, when you look at our existing zoning code, and we'll talk about this when we bring forward zoning changes to the Planning Commission and to the City Council, but currently when you go through our zoning code, if you want to go do something and you're adjoining, for example, an R1 district, it would default to an R1 standard for many things. Instead, it would say, hey, we default to the least restrictive zoning district. So it would be, say you were a B1, it would be the B1 standard.
I would like to see that just from a flexibility standpoint.
definitely. All right. So in terms of the neighborhood mixed use, so the thing that's closest to that neighborhood mixed use is the commercial mixed use, and that's actually the next category, and that's the red. And so if you flip over the page, commercial mixed use, this is areas right now that we have designated in that deep kind of red color right now. Yeah, or yeah, brownish red. It's hard to see, but that's what it was on the existing map right now. And so essentially what we're looking at doing in those areas is adding in more mixed use. So adding in the potential for residential units in these areas. Right now, you could only have multifamily in those areas if you have an adjacent R3 zoning district. So the reason that you have some of the Sugarloaf Living and other living facilities east of Mankato is because the hospital is actually zoned R3. So the only reason you can have that is because you have that R3 zoning right next door. So what we'd like to do is redesignate those so that you don't have to have that R3 zoning next door in order to be able to put residential units in commercial areas and create that mixed use. Basically, people being able to live where they want to, next to where they want to shop or where they want to go and patronize. And so in addition to the area that's kind of on the east end that is already well established, what we'd be looking at is also expanding that designation along Highway 61. You can see on the east end there, south of 61, kind of in the triangle area where Quick Trip is. And then also extending that classification kind of up along Sugarloaf Road where you have some historic older, the old commercial area essentially before the highway came in. Yep, right in there. Exactly. Yep. And those areas right now are already zoned for business. So this would just support that existing zoning. So it's really not much of a change. It's just reflecting what's currently there right now. And since we're in that area, so if you go right across the street to what used to be the Wells Fargo building is now owned by Winona Health. And then you also have Dairy Queen and the YMCA. And so what we do is the properties that are owned by Winona Health as well as YMCA would go to that semi-public institutional classification. So what that would do is allow additions and expansions of a higher density. Since it is part of a campus per se, that classification would apply not only to the Winona Health campus, but also campuses like WSU and St. Mary's as well. But what we would do is the commercial properties, Dairy Queen and the dental office, those would be guided for that commercial mixed use. Whereas that whole area in the past was just straight commercial. So then as you move up Highway 61, taking a look at areas that are really commercial right now, but then adding in that potential for mixed use in that area. So think the Winona Mall property. You have the Gunderson building, which, you know, the building itself is pretty established, but say that a portion of the parking area, if they were wanting to do something there, if they saw the ability to be able to do that, that would facilitate some additional developable area. Also in the mall area too, there's a lot of property in that area that could be used for some additional development. The property owner, Johnny Alexander, through Johnson and Schofield, came in for a plat for this area to subdivide some additional and create some additional parcels on the mall property. So this would help to facilitate additional development in that area. And then as you move down, really what we're doing is changing that existing commercial designation to the commercial mixed use to allow some potential for additional residential units to be put in areas such as next to Hy-Vee, and then kind of around the Ultra Federal Credit Union. And then you have some of the uses like the DAC and the Sauer Memorial Healthcare kind of in this area as well. those uses would still be permitted in this zoning district or in this classification. It would just allow for future reuse to have a more mixed use nature.
What's the difference between the dark brown and the black?
So everything that's dark brown would become red,
That's commercial.
and that's commercial mixed use. Yep. We just didn't color in the dark brown stuff because we just didn't. And then, John, your question about kind of the land next to the American here, that would be commercial mixed use as well. Absolutely none. No, with this, definitely taking a look at the land uses that are immediately adjacent. They also just did their comprehensive plan. So making sure that things work together related to that as well. And I'll touch base on too, the WSU is working on their plan for the campus, their latest iteration of their campus plan. And some of the recommendations that we've been making, we want to make sure that they are essentially in line with what they're doing so that we can work together in terms of future development in the WSU area.
If the industrial area, off Pelzer, did that expand in here?
Yes, so the industrial, the industrial area that Luke is circling right now, and I'd say industrial area, really that's the intermodal terminal owned by Rich McRoot. What he has been doing is acquiring properties immediately adjacent to it. And so what this would do is designate all the properties that are north of that road as general industrial in the future, so that they could be rezoned to match the zoning of the intermodal terminal. Because his intent, I believe, is to create kind of a buffer between the existing residential and the intermodal terminal. But it's just a matter of time acquiring the properties. He's gone slowly but surely to acquire properties adjacent to that. And so what we do, and it's difficult because that facility does back right up to the residential neighborhood. But right now, the dividing line is just a fence. And so right now, so what we seek to do is have that dividing line instead be the street. So you have a little bit more of a physical distance buffer there than what you do right now.
I know you said you added pink, but I still see a lot of existing businesses. Like, for example, I don't know, maybe that Plato's or the flower shop on Broadway or the 929 Beer House, I don't know. So there's still some pink that's not on it. Is that purposeful?
So all of those uses in our traditional neighborhood designation would be specifically called out, not the businesses themselves, but called out as permitted in traditional neighborhood. So that would get to what we've been talking about, re-legalizing some of the historic neighborhood commercial uses, where you're not necessarily in a commercial area, but you have kind of a one-off commercial use, like the high and low, like the 929, like some of those. No, Flowers on Broadway is another one, as well as Blado's. Those are just the ones that come to mind for me. In any case, so those would be part of the traditional neighborhood designation, and we specifically focus on re-legalizing those.
So is that a change in zoning to the?
What it would be is it would be a modification to our R2 zoning district, and it would be a modification in the permitted use table.
So somebody, would they have to come in for conditional use permit?
They may have to come in for a conditional use permit. If we are introducing new uses like that into a neighborhood, I think some type of conditional use permit would be appropriate. Yep. Exactly. So as part of the conditional use permit, we can talk about hours of operation. We can talk about, to again, make sure that you have that good neighbor policy essentially, and not just a policy, but actual things in the conditional use permit that require it. Following through, the next designation that we're looking at is limited industrial office, and fringe residential. And so what this is an expansion on our current limited industrial that we have right now, allowing for office uses as well as residential uses when you're kind of on the fringe of that uh, land use designation. So we don't want to necessarily introduce new residential units in the heart of a limited industrial area, but if you're on the edge of an industrial area, that's where residential uses we think are appropriate. So for instance, the property that's immediately west, or I'm sorry. Yes, so the property that is immediately east of Bay State Milling. Right now, we have that, and Luke is pointing to that right now, kind of the Michael's Lighting area. Right now, that's designated as urban residential. And so what we do is we designate that as limited industrial, office, and fringe residential, with the idea being that there could be a mix of uses in there. Doesn't necessarily have to be reused for residential, but this classification, since it's on the fringe of a limited industrial area, would allow for residential use. So it's basically introducing more flexibility into that land use designation.
So the current designation for like the Michael's property, it would allow just for residential and not mixed use.
That's correct.
And so it could be either residential or mixed use with this change.
Or both. Yep. So it's just given a lot of flexibility. The main thing is that, so what we do is currently it's designated for urban residential, right? So we'd allow more uses, but cap it at that level. So what we wouldn't want to see is a new heavy manufacturing use go in on those lots. And so another case of limited industrial is the property that is home to Winona, the ambulance service right now, that building. Right now it's designated as the downtown fringe. But given the nature and the commercial nature and industrial nature of that building, we were looking to reclassify that to limited industrial. Again, because it's kind of on the fringes, it could potentially, you could do some residential in the future, but it basically better matches what's in that area right now. And if we skip over to the next classification is general industrial. And general industrial is where we collapse two different categories, a riverfront industrial as well as a general industrial classification. So we just collapse that all to one. So anything that's purple in this map or dark purple is just that general industrial classification now. And so what we did with this area, again, I believe this is owned by Rich Microot as well. Right now that's designated as downtown fringe, but given our need for additional manufacturing land and additional developable land for manufacturing and industrial purposes, we would be looking to redesignate that to general industrial and not downtown fringe. So instead of having housing in that area, you would have the potential for some more heavy manufacturing in that location. With the idea being too, is that you're having that gradual change. So you go from the downtown fringe where you have more commercial mixed use type of uses to the limited industrial where you have less of the potential for commercial and residential to the general industrial where you could have large manufacturing facilities to provide that gradual transition and intensity of uses. We also are looking at redesignating the block south of there, which is owned by Malt Europe. And then the properties that are home to the Pillbox Bat Company as well as Sanborn Canoe. But that would reflect the current uses that are on those properties.
Really all four of those blocks. There's Pillbox, then there's Lawrence Transportation, there's
Yep, those would stay, they're currently designated as limited industrial, they would stay limited industrial.
So, when we get to the public input part of the comprehensive plan, you may hear from some of the neighbors in these areas where we're making these changes. I think we should just keep that, how we explain and the transition.
Definitely. So explaining transitions, and one thing that we're working with our consultants right now to put together a nice digital map of this. So we're not going to be bringing out our hand-drawn version. But one thing that they will do is help us with showing on the map where we're making changes to what currently exists versus matching what already is there. So some of these colors are actual land use designation changes to allow new things. Others are essentially are not having any impact, and they're just matching what is already existing. So making that clarification is really important, so people know that, hey, this really isn't changing things where it's where it's not. So. Luke, if we want to go down to the east end next, kind of the far east end where we have it here. And so what we'd look to do is currently there's some areas that are designated for that general commercial. And what we'd look to do is in the area that's basically owned by the port, redesignate that as limited industrial, office, and fringe residential. So that kind of loosens up the designation for the potential for manufacturing or limited manufacturing or industrial uses in that area, and provides greater flexibility than just that straight commercial designation. So you could still have commercial in that area, but if the port wanted to sell those lots and did sell those lots for manufacturing use, that would be allowed under the land use designation. So it basically provides more flexibility for those lots.
That whole area at one time, it's all industrial, and that's sold in ours and Target. So it's already been used to go there for content.
Exactly. And we see more of the commercial use and then the mixed use kind of occurring towards the west side of it. In consistency with what has already happened, and then the potential for some other types of uses kind of over on the eastern side of that.
What's putting up to that bigger? Right here. Right now.
So that is all general commercial right now. So that would become the commercial mixed use. And again, we just didn't color it in because we didn't.
It's the subway, feeding gas.
Yep.
That little triangle. Yeah. I'm talking about this here.
Yes, this is Target, Burger King. That type of stuff.
There's the sliver that's owned by Severson, is that going in the purple or is that staying in the red?
The sliver that's owned by Severson would be in the red.
I think that's Miller.
Okay, all right.
But we're talking about the 3 parcels next to land.
Yeah, so that land would, yep. Just because of the MGM, right next door, that type of thing. So looking at more of a commercial type use for that lot.
You ever gonna get a road on the east side?
Well, it's kind of coming back during the construction that's happening, how we do need another entrance to the city. I mean, I heard that from a few businesses. We had a plan at one time.
I know, I like it.
It would make so much sense, right? It's in all the trucks that go into that industrial area. So,
Wouldn't be down in shape, like, wouldn't be that we want.
Comment I had heard was that the traffic counts are justified and close. That's.
Well, somebody who lives east, I live in the down towards City Yard Golf Course. it has never been more highlighted right now, that there's no way to get out of town. I mean, I can't go out at Fleet Farm anymore, I can't go out anywhere, my only option after work
Right.
is to go out by the dental office and hope that somebody in the 20-mile long traffic jam will let me in.
You used to be able to go left at Fleet Farm.
Yeah.
Get away.
Yeah.
But I noticed this past couple of weeks, a lot of people just drive over that. median
Yeah.
And they're still just taking a lot.
It is getting, I've heard some of the Port Authority commissioners talk about, is it time to revisit another East Memphis city? I think the highest traffic on the city is that Mankato.
Got a floodway.
Yeah.
It's a huge dollars.
And our Corps of Engineers, is
Non-winter projects.
You're right, it's not a minor project. On the other hand, one of the projects does that, it's not. So I think it's about that.
A transformative project, or a transformative project. We could tie it in with projects, if you just, they tie it in with capturing a little bit of that land there too. And making.
it's pretty high quality, but
This is what you're.
But it didn't even.
So we'll move on next to our residential classifications. And so the first one is suburban residential. And so that we're essentially looking at everything that's not semi-public institutional, south of Highway 61 would have this suburban residential classification. Right now, a lot of the property that you see kind of in here, that green is designated for limited residential, which is large lots, not facilitating future subdivisions. And so if somebody is going to put a subdivision in that area, and they need to rezone it, or they need a change in the land use designation, or a change to the comp plan. So it's a long process essentially. And so what this will do is this will allow the potential for future suburban development in these low density residential classification areas. So essentially what that would do is instead of promoting large lots in these areas, smaller lots, more compact subdivisions, so that hopefully facilitates new subdivisions in that area, and ones that actually cash flows they can actually count. So right now, because of the restrictions that we have on lot size and whatnot, it can be difficult to get the amount of lots and dwellings in order to make the project actually happen. And that's especially the case due to construction costs, and as Johnson Schofield and Bernie Brenner found out, bedrock issues. Bedrock's there and significantly expensive to work and underlaying funds around. And so essentially what it would do is just say that anything that's within the city of Winona south of 61 has potential for suburban development, which I think is appropriate. Even the agricultural uses that currently exist, those would be just fine. They would still be meeting the agricultural zone. So our agricultural natural resources zoning would not go away. Still continue to farm. You can still continue to do what you're doing on your parcel. It's just that if somebody were to buy it in the future, you wouldn't have to go and change land use designation to create a new residential subdivision. And part of this classification too is, you'll see in the description here, and this is really key, a mix of housing styles, predominantly single family dwelling units or two family owner occupied dwelling units. So if we were to allow additional density or housing choice in this area through a duplex, that would be owner occupied. And so what we would look to do is to allow duplexes within existing structures or do small additions. And it would have to be owner occupied. Essentially, you can kind of already do that right now, have a rooming unit in any house. You have 2 rooming units actually. But what you can't have is a second stove. But really what it comes down to is allowing people to put a second stove.
Doesn't seem like we're being flexible enough.
That's how it was. What's that? You could change the stove. What I'm trying to do
It's
is,
kind of archaic.
is to allow for, in existing subdivisions, allow for some change, but not too much. But then for future subdivisions, that's where this key, where we talk about a mix of housing styles, predominantly single family. But in future subdivisions, we'd like to see a mix of different housing styles, similar to what we have in Mount Valley. As well as Valley Oaks, where you have attached units, detached units, and then potential for multifamily, as well as other uses, such as church.
Encourage that.
What's the thought process on requiring owner occupancy, out here too, when we have that question? I mean, I get it, but tell me your thought process.
To a certain extent, it's already there right now. So in order to put a rooming unit in, the rooming unit is only allowed in an owner occupied house. So the thought process is just to allow a formal unit to go in and to establish that accountability and ownership of the land, so that you don't have a straight rental duplex. Could that change in the future in specific areas potentially? But I think it's important in established single family residential areas to take these steps. And we'd be looking at doing another comprehensive plan in another 10 to 15 years anyway. So, I think that's something that.
So new development, maybe build duplexes that didn't have that.
Yeah.
But let's say up in the Windcrest area, an existing home, if they're adding a unit, not converted to all rental, it would have to be a owner occupied home. To kind of make the transition.
I know of one already. Subdivision, for the people, put in the room, and neighbors of this. Wild, but this people want to get in that, so.
But what about the accessory dwelling unit? I mean, it seems like these garages, people are making them nicer and nicer. Even on the back of your garage, that wouldn't be.
That would be. Yeah. So we're just talking about a duplex within a primary district.
So in an existing neighborhood, you put an accessory unit. No. You can do that now, or that's.
I don't think we do that right now. Already. We are looking at potentially some modifications to our existing zoning for accessory dwelling units, for instance, but it already exists. All right, the next classification that we'll be looking at is traditional neighborhood. And traditional neighborhood is the core areas where you have primarily residential uses. And this is where we would allow a diversity of housing types and really try to see what we can do in terms of legalizing uses that we had talked about previously, as well as in this area have that grid pattern that we have historically created the city of Toronto. One key provision of this that we were looking at, what we heard from our attorney, is something that comes into play big time when we take a look at additional units in the core area of the city. So what we were looking at is to allow an exception to the 30% rule that would allow owner occupied units to go in blocks that are already saturated. City attorney's opinion is that that may, create some issues with the 30% rule itself. So that owner occupancy option isn't available. So the, exemption would not, be something that we do to the 30%. So if you're gonna be adding in new, rental unit, it would have to be on a block that is not already saturated. So if we're looking at it, adding an additional housing choice to the, traditional neighborhood area, the areas that are currently zoned R1 and R2 would have to be in areas that are not highlighted in yellow.
So that's our first initial reading that just came through in the email. There was a piece though, you know, because this goes back to the affordability and options and missing middle housing is a big part of what we've all been talking about, well, many subcommittees. But I think one of the things that was mentioned is making a case that owner occupied duplex is different than just duplex. As far as our study that was done years ago on how we get more nuisance, et cetera.
So you're saying can't change it because of what reason?
Because it would undermine the 30% rule, essentially. And so if we allowed owner occupied, new owner occupied rentals to go in blocks that are already saturated, it would undermine the intent of the 30% rule and would be court challenge. That would, potentially invalidate the 30% rule. So if we want to keep it, we wouldn't allow an exception.
So other communities have several,
You do.
and none of them have ever lost the challenge.
Well, looking at your map, you talk years ago about changing the zoning from a house street, perhaps, and changing it from what is now R1 to an R3. If we were to do that, what would happen?
So that's the next step. So if we have R1 or R2 zoning, you have, and the addition of new units would have to be in blocks that aren't saturated, correct? The other way to add additional housing choices with rezoning to R3, which is currently an exempt zoning classification, rezoning to commercial use or mixed use categories. So any of the commercial, mixed use, or R3 zoning areas, 30% over. So if there's specific areas where we want to add in more housing choice, it would, what we're talking about is rezoning. So on that note, we did talk about the 2 blocks surrounding WSU and looking at that for potential rezoning. And so what I did is I took a look at the potential density numbers in that area. And if you guys can share a little bit, that'd be great. So, Luca, do you have this up there? Okay, great. So what you see here, everything that's purple is what we would propose rezoning to R3. And those areas are currently zoned R2. So these areas are areas where the percentage of non-owner rentals are at or above 60%. So you see, like on the north side of the university, like this block, for instance, that's already at 100% rental. Change that to R3. This block here already at 100%. We go to R3. This one at 50%. What I did is anywhere you see an X is where you have owner occupancy. And in some cases, it's because you have rooming units like this, or it's because, for instance, somebody is sitting on a rental license in order to lock up the block and not allowing additional rentals on. So for instance, in this area here, you have Laura Cream and Mario Weisman, who have their residences here. So they have rental certificates for their properties, but they're not used. So essentially what that does is that makes sure that additional properties on that block not change the rental. But what they have done as well is purchase the properties adjacent to them, and utilize those for rental. So essentially, even though you're not having that owner occupied provision on the same block, because it's the house right next door, you've got the owner right next door. So that block, if you were just to look at straight rental, it's at 60%, but when you consider that the owners live right next door, so it's really kind of owner occupied, it's only at 40%. So for that block, and then these blocks here, we did not recommend any type of rezoning to R3. But as you go down further here, this is Mumpy's, this is Newman Center, that half of the block there, we would look at rezoning to R3 or mixed use, as well as these areas here. This is the other side of, this is where Quad 2.0 is located, Bingo Hall. 100% of that block on the other side is rental. So, sense to go to mixed use or R3, as well as these two down here. But then you really see, once you get to the next block, how things kind of drop off. If we're looking at future blocks to look at for R3, we could look at this half block, that block, potentially this block, but again, that right now it would be surrounded by R2, so that might not be a good fit. We wouldn't want to do any spot zoning in that case. So you see just how, kind of in this area here, the percentages start to drop off pretty substantially as we get beyond that one block distance from the university. And then down in here, you really kind of see where Sarnia is that cutoff point.
Well, notice enrollment is dropping as fast as it is, and they're building more units now. Again, do you think that that's have an impact on they're up 11% on some of these overlap? So their peak was 8,000, and last year they had 4,000, so they're back up to 4,400 or something.
Yeah, I can see that continuing to grow. My understanding.
Is that physical students for, I mean,
Physical.
because online,
Oh,
online availability.
What they found was people that dropped out of online, they dropped out of everything.
Right.
And what they have now is 11% increase. I think that's in person. That's
What, so, for example, 75%, melt down across from the church, there you go. So there are some owner occupied homes there, but you would propose changing it to R3, because 3/4 of it is rental. A homeowner there right now, if they sold their home, another homeowner would have to buy their home. So sometimes we run into situations where there's some frustration about, well, I have all these houses around me that are rental, but I have to sell mine as, so. So this kind of,
This would be, that was all.
part of it in areas that are,
This would allow 26 homes that are currently owner occupied.
So for 30% of those in fact, how do we get these, they block 50%, 70%?
Grandfather.
Right.
So before the 30% went into flood, everyone was buying certificates to get a certificate before that block.
So how does this not open us to litigation when we're, so if I live in a block that was 50%, and I'm owner occupied, and I'm trying to sell my home, but I didn't benefit from this change. And I'm saying, well, now I'm having a hard time selling my home. My valuation isn't there. I'm having a hard time with this. I could be frustrated. Hey, Dave, those people across the street got a deal. So you helped those 28 people. Now you're.
That's always the case. Right across the street, there's always something there. I remember when we came to think about soul days, no, bought the house like 6 months earlier. It's like, you know, it's the point you buy. It's just the way it is, right? We can't protect everything from everybody.
So we're doing this as a changing the comp plan, and then changing the zoning. And we're feeling that would insulate us from, because we would be changing the zoning, insulating us from potential litigation with 30%. Like,
Yes,
okay, okay, our attorney.
well, we haven't, put this specifically to him, but it's already in the ordinance for the 30% rule that we already have an exception for the RFP. So it is an exception that's already in there, so. And so, if you're taking a look at blocks to the east of WSU, these are kind of areas too where, in their comprehensive planning process, they designate kind of these 4 blocks here as what they call city WSU or a partnership area, with the other entities as well, where they see, the potential for uses that support their student population. So maybe small scale commercial, maybe some mixed use in there that's oriented towards students. Basically flexibility in these areas. So, would we look at R2 zoning or maybe a mixed use neighborhood in a portion of this? That's something yet to be determined based on, wanting to make sure our planning process with that meshes well. But in any case, we'd be looking to rezone in this area, these 4 blocks, 75%, 86%, 60%, 60%, as well as the west half of this block. This area here is already zoned B1. So what we look at doing is rezoning this area here to that neighborhood mixed use classification.
What is education?
Education village is right. And so this, anything that's education village would go to that semi-public institution.
Here's the, just one block to the west of Plot Street. This is huge.
Yeah, just these few in here. Because as you get up in here, even though these are saturated, you see that people are sitting on certificates here. So kind of, you see the more the owner occupancy, and I think some of the people that were interested in the 30% rule maintaining their integrity of their neighborhoods, they had their houses in this area. And that is reflected by the fact that they have certificates that blah, blah, blah.
So that was something that they're on their own property, but not, because they have that, nobody else.
My mom lives on Main Street, she was so sick of the house rental on the street that she bought it and then put a deed restriction in that never made rental. So
I mean, I understand that it can be frustrating for some people, but I, in the back of my mind, think that thank goodness for those people who are doing that, because it is preserving part of the longest history by not putting a lot of those really nice homes into more and more rentals.
And we're saying that in areas where, we have that strong, owner occupancy presence right now, to keep that. But in areas where we don't, let's look at some of us, right?
When just a side note, there was a task force that looked at the 30% rule a few years after it was adopted, and what they found is that we had so many conversions of single family to rental over a short period of time, and we were trying to maintain the integrity of the neighborhood. That's the reason. That they found that there were about 110 homes that could have been converted had the city not adopted within 2 blocks of the whole state, had we not adopted it.
The saturated block, I can see how it's almost easier just to change those blocks over. But in certain areas where you do a lot of families, almost like that integrity of that block. And like I said earlier, I enjoy having these families live on my rentals, just for the simple reason where there's something going down or they're being loud or in a party or whatever. They're sending me a message, let me know what's going on. For that reason, I love it.
I think we can probably all agree that some rentals are better executed than others. And if everybody felt that way, then we probably wouldn't be having these conversations as much, right?
Only question I would have for Carlos is, it's easy to make rules. My question is, so if you have a duplex, or occupied duplex, and then you own or sell it. And then you both aren't in it. What teeth do you have as a city to say it has to be occupied, or you get fined $10,000, $20,000, whatever? What can you do to stop it? I see too many rules where you go, can't do this, but there's no, maybe it goes along with the vision from power.
So, we have the rental, that right on it says, yes, all the rentals. The other thing that we could do is if we have an owner occupancy requirement, such as Subcommittee 61, have it be allowed as a use permit or additional use permit. So in addition to that certificate, we also have a permit that is issued as well. So what that will do is that gives us enforcement mechanisms.
So if I still ignore, then what happens?
This again.
But the money can be every day at 3%.
So
The language that she might be able to. So, yeah.
Has this been brought up to the housing?
or no, you are, this is the service version.
Okay.
So.
It'd be curious to see their opinion on it too, just to.
That's actually a good point. We've been talking about this individual and certifications throughout. How do you all feel? Some discussion, but feel like the challenge is like your comments are greater than that on that, far enough, not only far enough. Are we say the right ideas? Are we way out base?
I feel like we're just sort of like your police force, like we're just checking your work, like you guys are doing all the work, we're just doing it, but I don't think you guys are steering a lot because of our comments, which is fine, because you guys are pros, we're just schmoes.
I feel like we're still learning about what's gonna, I feel like today's the first day we're really kind of seeing something to really, now we can think on and kind of, we're in our learning process.
Yeah, and the key is that it's all in draft form. It's in draft form all the way up until it's actually adopted, which we're looking at the second quarter of.
And I feel like half of it is just bringing things up to where the current use is. I mean,
That's
right. There's been many changes in the last, that comprehensive plan and assumptions made or whatever, so now we're making that official, I guess. And then the other half, I see you being very careful to start to build in possibility for more mixed use. Because I don't have, see it as a plus for this one.
We sort of know, and what projects are in the pipeline already, and they're sort of steering, sort of help us happen the way they should.
And it gets back to, you know, what we want to see is continued investment in what things going on, and continued investment in the core area of the city. In addition to other, you know, more expansion areas as well, but to enable and encourage development while maintaining the character of communities. The last thing, and we're at our hour here, is the last two pages, which are pretty self-explanatory, but the last, so on page 3, we have outdoor recreation, open space, and city-owned properties. And so right now we have a couple different categories. And so what we would do is anything that is either city-owned recreation space or outdoor recreation or open space, just open space be changed to green. So for instance, in park would be green here, city-owned facility on the east end here. You could just no, I think that whole block.
Oh, it is full.
Okay, yep, Yep, and then the half block where St. Stan's is on right now is, that's the institutional. Sure, exactly, yep, and it's part of a larger. So what we did for the next designation is that semi-public institutional, and that's where we applied that to campuses, so we're thinking either more than 2 buildings related to a specific use. Sometimes you have those neighborhood churches that are smaller, they have maybe just have 1 building, that where people, the pastor stays or has historical stayed. Those would still stay classified as traditional neighborhood, but where you have more of a campus type deal, multiple buildings, that's where we would designate it as the semi-public.
You see, so that church in Mount Valley, I don't see that. Is that here?
Yeah. So what we would look at that is part of the suburban residential.
There's a church here on 14, that's green.
Okay. And to be honest, we didn't get into as much detail in that area. But I didn't know.
And so essentially, nothing has changed in terms of actual properties.
You got it.
And we're not creating more space, expanding this either. What's there is there.
What's there is there. Yep. So we're not taking anything now and designating it as open space. Basically, if it's open space, it's open. The semi-public institutional designation. So WSU, Potter area, what that'll do is facilitate a new zoning district to be created that allows development which is consistent with the campus field. Right now, WSU, the whole campus is zoned R2. So anytime they want to put a building in that's taller than 35 feet, they gotta come in for a variance. Anytime they want to put a building in that might not meet the setbacks, they gotta come in for a variance. Since it's part of a campus, it's appropriate to have those large buildings. Same thing goes for Winona Health. You want to put a new building in, you shouldn't have to be held back by R3 multifamily zoning standards. You should be able to have looser standards that fit use than should be online.
We had an issue over like,
Yep, over by Potter right now. Thankfully, with Potter, not thankfully, but what it did is where they put the new building in, there's a little block of R3 zoning in that area. So what we do is we get rid of that block and just zone the whole campus as a semi-public institution.
So these are primarily the non-tax.
Exactly.
So the area where you got on that campus, Potter, and it goes all the way over to County Street.
Well, I just noted Potter here, but that would also include the properties that WSU is selling. Potter Field. Yeah.
That's works. What was it you acquired for that?
What are the
Maria and Tal,
Yes.
but more into what's kind of about trust.
Yeah.
Lord.
So I apologize, I have to go off. I'm not reading around construction.
Okay, are you free in 2 weeks?
of this time?
What's the date? I can say maybe. I'm on vacation officially for the next 2 weeks, but probably likely we'll be back in town by 4.
So we would like to have at least 2 more meetings in August for this land use subcommittee. And maybe we could look 3 weeks out on the 11th and do the 25th as well. Give people a little more time to chew on this land use map proposal and really bring back some thoughts. Since we didn't really have a lot of time for general discussion. So if we look at the 11th, how does 8:30 in the morning on the 11th? Thumbs up. Somebody else feels comfortable with that? All right, 8:30 at the 11th.
Is there options for us to get emailed copies of this or?
Yep.
Just so.
And another thing that I've been working on as well is, and I can just hand this out here. Think about for the next meeting is in addition to the map and the destination page procedures. We also have written goals, objectives, and strategies that we'll be working on. And so I've created some here. And so the idea would be, take a look at these for the next meeting, let us know what you think. Some of Brian, your suggestions I have to add to it. So flip it over.
Resilient neighborhoods. You noted that, then there were some other ones that I need to add.
So we'll add additional goals, objectives, and take a look at that.
Perfect, thank you. I apologize.
So, is there anything in zoning restrictions that would prohibit, the church from buying a neighboring property and not paying taxes, taking, moving off them? And calling it their mixed-use parish would have. So as church acquired property.
Yeah, you know, so the hospitals bought those apartment buildings, turned them into the YMCA, so they went from paying a lot of tax to.
One note, sorry for this church up here, we bought this property in the year 2000, building and there was the original farmhouse. We rented the farmhouse, and when we rented the farmhouse out, we got torn down. We paid tax on it. That was a problem. Now, let's see. I apologize, maybe that was income tax and not property tax, my bad.
We were under the house.
The best deal we ever did was, because we were able to move the church in Goodview and take the church property.
Get her on the deck, folks.
Buying our churches are not. Yeah,
Yeah.
understood.
There's, you know, the other drugs.
Yeah.
I mean, a number of churches, well, they're just barely staying above the water.
Right. Part of the Catholic, there's some point those smaller Catholic churches, I guess not.
Well, how about after this United? But there's 100 members for that half of a block, there's no way you want to turn it back. Say, all right, well, what can we do with that building? But it's not, it's not gonna be wrong. That's- Should well be.
About a third of our property is taxed.
That's right, that's pretty, very hot there.
But there is a lot of value to, the universities, for example.
Understand.
Yeah.
We're county seat, in Old Town, and the top two to three universities, both institutions.
And a lot of city on lands. That's for one of us. I have more like an internal question. It's on open space. If we have a park that doesn't make sense to be a park, and it's 5 houses and it's not used.
So,
Open space.
Were you developing?
Development.
yes.
We only have a couple like that.
Yeah, what I have in here too, and this is key. Public spaces are periodically evaluated for new, additional, and or different uses in accordance with the function.
Like, to kind of wait. Nick is not about this. There's one over by the middle school, isn't a park with any design, it's a piece of land. It can't be developed. And it's just a piece of.
So what this language would do is say that if something like that comes up, the comp plan tells us that we should look at you.
Right, although it does, I think it might even have to go less. Any kind of issue.
That's all that I have. So on the 11th, any thoughts that you have on the map? Again, we'll email that out as well as take a look at these goals and objectives and those change those as we like. this is all, here's